Alright, folks. Let's get into it. Because what just dropped in the last 24 hours might be the messiest 1-2-3 punch in hip-hop this entire summer, and I promise you, by the time we're done unpacking every single layer of this thing, you're going to see the industry a little differently than you did when you clicked on this video. We've got Rick Ross out here practically begging the internet to believe he's already rich before his own album drops. We've got 50 Cent sitting on a silence so loud that even the industry insiders are starting to whisper. And we've got a brand new IDK confession about Eminem that has a certain corner of Black Twitter absolutely melting down in real time. So buckle in, everybody. This one's got layers, and we're peeling every single one, so don't skip ahead, because the second story alone rewrites how you look at 50 Cent's entire online persona. Let's start with Rick Ross. Here's the thing. Rick Ross is set to drop his 12th studio album this coming Friday, and instead of letting the music speak, Rick Ross just recorded what has to be the most transparent piece of preemptive damage control I've seen a rapper attempt in years. Rick Ross sat there on camera, and Rick Ross essentially told the world he doesn't care what the album does numerically because Rick Ross has already been paid. That was the pitch. That was the whole speech. Rick Ross wanted us to believe that album performance is beneath him now, that Rick Ross has evolved past caring about sales, that Rick Ross is untouchable in the boardroom even if the streaming charts don't cooperate. And listen, the internet was not buying a single syllable of that speech, and by the time I finished watching the clip, I understood exactly why. Because here's what nobody with a functioning brain missed. If Rick Ross was actually confident in this album, Rick Ross wouldn't need to walk out onto camera and pre-explain his sales floor before the album even hits shelves. That's not confidence. That's a parachute. That's Rick Ross opening up an insurance policy on his own release week. So peep this. Nav Josh, one of the sharpest voices in the hip-hop media space, called it out immediately. Nav Josh basically told Rick Ross the quiet part out loud. Nobody cares whether Rick Ross got his advance. Nobody logs onto Spotify wondering about a rapper's cash check. Fans want songs. Fans want anthems. And when a real anthem hits, it doesn't need a press release from the artist reminding everyone that the artist is wealthy. Anthems sell themselves. Rick Ross knows this. Which is exactly why Rick Ross went into pre-defense mode before he even had numbers to defend against. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. Because Rick Ross isn't dropping in a vacuum. Rick Ross is dropping into a marketplace where Iceman just moved something in the neighborhood of 80,000 units in the previous tracking week. 80,000. Let that number sit for a moment. And the industry projections floating around for Rick Ross's opening frame are hovering somewhere between 24,000 and 30,000. Do the math with me for 1 second. If those projections hold, Iceman's 9th week is on pace to outsell Rick Ross's debut week. 9th week versus 1st week. That's not a competitive gap. That's a canyon. And Rick Ross, being the businessman Rick Ross tells us he is, absolutely saw that trajectory before he ever hit record on that damage control clip. Which is why, if you rewatch that clip, you'll notice something. Rick Ross isn't just talking about being paid. Rick Ross is trying to redefine the metric of success mid-cycle. He's trying to move the goalposts before the game even kicks off. So let's keep it 100, everybody. What Rick Ross did wasn't strategy. It was pre-loss management. Rick Ross tried to condition the audience's expectations so that when the numbers come in soft, the fanbase has a talking point ready. Oh, but Rick Ross already got paid. Oh, but Rick Ross doesn't play the streaming game. Oh, but Rick Ross is above the charts. That's a script. And the audience saw the script before Rick Ross even finished reading it out loud. And once the audience sees the script, the illusion collapses, and the artist looks smaller than he did before he opened his mouth. The comments underneath that clip are a demolition site. One user called it a PR stunt engineered to soften low album numbers before they even land. Another wrote that if Rick Ross was truly dropping heat, Rick Ross wouldn't need to perform well on camera. And then somebody else compared Rick Ross to DJ Khaled and said they genuinely can't figure out which of the two men is more addicted to shouting his own greatness into an empty room. And listen, I don't necessarily co-sign every comment, but the pattern is undeniable. The audience has caught on. They know what desperation sounds like even when it's dressed up in a tailored suit and a boss talk voiceover. And once an audience learns to read desperation, it's almost impossible for the artist to fool them again. That's the price of one bad PR move. And here's the part that stings a little bit for the Rick Ross legacy. Rick Ross has actually built one of the most durable rap catalogs of the last 2 decades. Rick Ross has legitimately made classics. Rick Ross doesn't need this. But somewhere along the way, Rick Ross bought into the idea that being seen as rich is more important than being heard as an artist. And now Rick Ross is stuck between 2 identities. The rapper who used to let the music arrive without commentary, and the CEO cosplay version who feels the need to narrate his own bank statements. The internet is choosing which one they want. Rick Ross may not like the results. And when Friday comes and those first week numbers hit the wire, we'll find out whether the damage control speech was a shield or an anchor. But we're rolling to what's next, because this next one has everyone in the barbershop, in the podcast chairs, and in the group chats absolutely fired up. And it all comes back to one man. 50 Cent. Because 50 Cent, one of the most feared internet trolls to ever grace this platform, has gone eerily quiet. And the industry is not sure what to make of it. Some are calling it growth. Some are calling it strategy. Some are quietly whispering that maybe, just maybe, 50 Cent has finally aged into the version of himself that stops needing to win every fight in public. But before we crown that theory, let's look at what actually happened. Here's the backdrop. Not too long ago, Akademiks, one of the most polarizing personalities in the hip-hop commentary space, took Daphne Joy out on what the internet has now permanently rebranded as that date. Daphne Joy, for anybody who needs the context, is the mother of 50 Cent's son. Their romantic relationship ended somewhere around 13 years ago, which is basically an eternity in celebrity time. And yet the moment Akademiks posted that image, the internet immediately turned to one man and one man only. Where's 50 Cent? What is 50 Cent going to say? When is 50 Cent going to nuke the internet? Because that's the reflex. That's what everybody expects from 50 Cent. That's the character 50 Cent has been playing for 2 solid decades. And 50 Cent said nothing. Which is somehow louder than anything 50 Cent could have posted. Now, this week, media personality Ray Daniels weighed in on the whole thing and admitted he was genuinely surprised by 50 Cent's silence. Ray Daniels said, in so many words, that the version of 50 Cent that Ray Daniels crowned as the king troll of the era would have already turned Akademiks into a meme by now. Ray Daniels acknowledged that 50 Cent's silence has to mean something. And Ray Daniels floated a theory that everybody should sit with. Maybe 50 Cent isn't quiet because 50 Cent doesn't care. Maybe 50 Cent is quiet because 50 Cent's son is old enough now to see everything, read everything, and feel everything. And 50 Cent, for all the online chaos 50 Cent has caused, is still that boy's father. And a father, no matter how public his war with the mother once was, eventually has to decide whether the next punchline is worth the collateral. Real talk, everybody. That theory hits different when you actually sit with it. Because 50 Cent has never been a man who backs down from an internet war. 50 Cent has publicly gone at Diddy. 50 Cent has publicly gone at Fabulous. 50 Cent has publicly gone at Jay-Z, and then somehow made peace, and then poked the bear again anyway. 50 Cent doesn't do silent. 50 Cent does viral. So if 50 Cent is holding fire, there's a reason. And Ray Daniels landed on what may be the only reason big enough. The child. Ray Daniels then made a broader point that a lot of grown men need to sit with. Ray Daniels said that when a man chooses to have a child with a woman, that woman becomes a permanent fixture in his life whether he wants her there or not, because that child will grow into a person who loves both parents equally. So dragging the mother in public is really dragging the child in private. And Ray Daniels believes that's the calculation 50 Cent has finally decided to make. Whether or not you buy that read, it's a compelling one. And it recasts 50 Cent's silence not as defeat, but as discipline. And discipline, from a man who built his brand on chaos, is arguably the more interesting story. Now here's where I have to push back on part of Ray Daniels' take, because I think Ray Daniels is missing a few years of context. There was a moment, not that long ago, when 50 Cent essentially said publicly and without ambiguity that Daphne Joy was free to date whoever she wanted, and 50 Cent used some far less polite words to make that point. So if 50 Cent were to now come out swinging at Akademiks over Daphne Joy, 50 Cent would be violating a stance 50 Cent already staked out in front of the entire internet. That's not king troll behavior. That's flip-flop behavior. And 50 Cent knows the difference. 50 Cent has always been strategic about when to fight and when to walk. That's why 50 Cent is still standing while half his peers have retired from the internet. There's also the small detail that Akademiks is not the caliber of opponent 50 Cent typically hunts. 50 Cent goes after industry titans. 50 Cent goes after billionaires. 50 Cent goes after Grammy winners and mogul tier operators. Elevating Akademiks into a full 50 Cent beef would inflate Akademiks' profile in ways that would only benefit Akademiks. And 50 Cent, being the strategist we've all been forced to admit 50 Cent is, understands that some fights double the opponent's followers. So sometimes the smartest move is no move. Sometimes the smartest response is the one you don't post. And listen, the internet has caught on to that logic too. One reply I couldn't stop reading said, and I'm paraphrasing, that 50 Cent can't be held responsible for the choices Daphne Joy makes in a relationship that ended over a decade ago. Another one asked, if 50 Cent already publicly declared he didn't care who Daphne Joy dated, why would 50 Cent break his own word for a personality like Akademiks? And a third one just laughed and pointed out that Ray Daniels seems to think 50 Cent and Daphne Joy broke up 3 months ago, when in reality it's been closer to 13 years. 13 years is not a fresh wound. 13 years is a scar somebody healed from a long time ago. But here's the part one actually want everybody to sit with. There's a version of this story where 50 Cent is playing chess and everyone else is playing checkers. 50 Cent is a Cancer, and if you know anything about that particular kind of quiet, you know it's rarely peaceful. It's a stalking silence. It's the silence of a man taking notes. Akademiks is a public figure who lives online, and public figures who live online eventually produce scandals of their own. And when Akademiks finally hands 50 Cent the ammunition, 50 Cent will not need Daphne Joy as a reason. 50 Cent will already have 3 folders full of receipts and an internet ready to eat. And on that day, the same people saying 50 Cent lost this round will be pretending they saw the ambush coming. That's the theory that's been circulating. And honestly, based on the way 50 Cent has operated for 2 decades, I wouldn't bet against it. 50 Cent doesn't forget. 50 Cent files. And when the file is thick enough, 50 Cent opens it in public. And while we're on 50 Cent, let me remind everybody of something the critics keep conveniently forgetting. 50 Cent has moved the equivalent of roughly 60 million albums globally, and that number hasn't been formally updated in years, which means the real figure is quite a bit higher. 50 Cent's first birthday of his 51st year just passed, and 50 Cent is still, by every honest measurement, one of the most commercially successful rappers in the history of the genre. So when critics try to frame 50 Cent's silence as weakness, they're forgetting that 50 Cent doesn't need to prove anything anymore. 50 Cent has the receipts preloaded. 50 Cent has the plaques on the wall. 50 Cent has a television empire that pays him more per year than most rappers see in a career. Alright, but we're not done. Because the third story in today's rotation might be the most quietly explosive of all 3, and it involves a name that always sets certain corners of the internet on fire the second it's mentioned. Eminem. Here's how this one started. Rapper IDK, who has been steadily carving out his own lane in the underground mainstream hybrid space, posted a simple, sincere statement on X. IDK wrote that Eminem was the first person who made rap feel fun to him. That's it. That's the whole sentence. There was no ranking. There was no comparison. There was no shot fired at anyone else. IDK was simply describing his own personal entry point into hip-hop as a listener. And you would have thought IDK had committed a war crime, judging by the response. Because within hours, a very specific corner of Twitter descended on IDK. And I mean descended. You had commentators demanding to know why IDK didn't credit Busta Rhymes first, as if Busta Rhymes was somehow required to be IDK's personal introduction to fun and rap. You had commentators asking IDK when he started listening to hip-hop, as if the answer would somehow invalidate his own memory. And you had the usual professor-tier commentators, the ones who have built entire personality brands on cultural gatekeeping, essentially accusing IDK of only enjoying rap once he saw a white artist doing it. That was the pitch. That was the framing. Because IDK dared to say Eminem was fun. And I want to be really clear about something. IDK never said Eminem was the greatest. IDK never said Eminem was better than any black rapper. IDK never even said Eminem was his favorite. IDK just said Eminem was the first person who made rap feel fun to him, personally, in his own listening history. That's the kind of statement that, in a healthy discourse, gets a shrug and a scroll. But we don't live in that timeline. So instead, IDK became the villain of the day for approximately 11 hours. All because IDK told the truth about the music that shaped him. Meanwhile, in the same replies, actor and hip-hop head Paige Kennedy chimed in with something that actually added texture. Paige Kennedy said that for him, the first artist who made rap feel fun wasn't Eminem, it was the Fat Boys. Paige Kennedy then added, with a touch of humor, that IDK probably had never even heard of the Fat Boys because IDK was born in the 2000s. And that's a real conversation. That's a generational taste conversation. That's the discussion that should have happened. Instead, the loudest voices decided to make IDK's personal memory into a political stance he never took. And that's the tragedy of the modern internet. A memory becomes a manifesto whether the person wanted it to or not. And here's the wild part. Some listeners went even further and doubled down in the opposite direction. One commenter, who described himself as a black rap fan raised on Jay-Z, Nas, and DMX, said Eminem's Marshall Mathers LP rearranged his entire idea of what hip-hop could be. He said the album hit him like a UFO because it came from a perspective nobody in his everyday orbit had ever offered. And this take is not new. Frank Ocean has said something similar in the past, admitting that Eminem was so untouchable in his prime that Frank Ocean felt like a snob just listening to him. So the notion that Eminem changed people's relationship with rap isn't controversial. It's documented. It's on the record. It has sold over 200 million albums worth of evidence. But that's the problem. Because for a very specific slice of online commentator, admitting Eminem's impact is a threat to a much larger narrative they're trying to sell. And so anytime an artist, especially a black artist, publicly acknowledges what Eminem meant to their personal taste, that admission gets treated as a betrayal. IDK found that out this week. Frank Ocean found it out years ago. And plenty of others have quietly stopped saying it out loud because they don't want to spend the next 48 hours arguing with strangers on a comment thread. That's the chilling effect of cultural gatekeeping. Truth becomes optional when honesty carries attacks. And listen, I'll be straight with you. This debate isn't actually about Eminem. This debate is about who's allowed to define fun inside hip-hop culture. And when you frame it that way, the gatekeepers get exposed. Because if fun in rap can only be granted by a small number of pre-approved names, then fun stops being personal, and it becomes a permit you have to apply for. And that's not how music works. That's not how discovery works. That's not how a 15-year-old kid in a basement stumbling onto the Slim Shady LP works. That kid isn't checking a list. That kid is just laughing at what he's hearing. And the moment we start telling that kid his laugh is wrong, we've killed the culture ourselves. There's also a broader point worth making. IDK also mentioned in the same conversation that Ludacris was a top-tier fun-in-rap artist for him, which honestly, I couldn't agree with more. Ludacris was one of the most vocally athletic, punchline-heavy, character-driven rappers of an entire generation. Ludacris then pivoted his career into film and television and never looked back, which is why the youngest listeners today may not fully understand what Ludacris was doing in the early 2000s. But if you were around, you know. Ludacris made rap feel like a Saturday morning. That's the closest analogy I can give. And it's worth remembering that IDK named a black artist in the exact same breath as Eminem. The critics conveniently ignored that half of the quote. So where does all of this leave us? Rick Ross is pre-defending an album that hasn't dropped yet, and the internet has already written the obituary. 50 Cent is refusing to respond to Akademiks dating Daphne Joy, and the industry is finally catching on that 50 Cent's silence is not defeat but discipline. And IDK is being punished online for having a real, honest, unremarkable opinion about Eminem, which tells you more about the current state of hip-hop discourse than anything Peace could ever unpack. 3 different stories. 3 different pressure points. But if you zoom out, they're all the same story. They're all about the difference between what an artist actually does and how the internet decides to frame it. Rick Ross wants to be seen as untouchable, but the receipts show a man in defense mode. 50 Cent wants to be seen as unbothered, and the industry can't decide whether that's growth or restraint. And IDK wanted to be seen as a fan of a rapper he grew up loving, but the discourse machine turned him into a talking point he never signed up for. That's hip-hop in this era. That's the algorithm we all live under. Everybody is a story before they're a person, and once the story starts running, the person can't outrun it. Now here's my honest take, because I want to close on something real. 50 Cent is the biggest wild card in all three of these stories, even though 50 Cent only appears in one of them by name. Because if 50 Cent decides to break silence this week, everything shifts. If 50 Cent says one sentence about Akademiks, the internet detonates. If 50 Cent posts one meme about Rick Ross's Damage Control, the album cycle changes. And if 50 Cent so much as subtweets the Eminem discourse, an entire second wave of commentary launches. That's the power 50 Cent still holds, and it's exactly why 50 Cent's silence carries the weight it does. Silence from a man who never used to be silent is its own kind of statement. So here's what I want to hear from you, everybody. Do you think Rick Ross's preemptive Damage Control saves the album cycle or sinks it further? Do you think 50 Cent is genuinely done responding to Daphne Joy narratives, or is 50 Cent quietly loading a comeback we won't see coming? And do you think the online backlash against IDK is really about Eminem, or is it about something much bigger sitting underneath the surface of hip-hop discourse right now? Drop your verdict in the comments. Tell me who's winning the week. Tell me who's losing the plot. And tell me which of these three stories you want a full deep dive on next, because there's a lot more underneath every single one of these that we didn't get to today. There are receipts I didn't pull. There are quotes I didn't play. And there are angles the mainstream press won't touch. So if you want the next tier of this conversation, tell me in the replies, and I'll build the follow-up around whichever story you push the hardest. Because trust me on this. If the last 24 hours are any indication, we haven't even seen the real fireworks yet. Rick Ross has an album to defend. 50 Cent has a silence to eventually break. And Akademiks is one bad night away from becoming the biggest story of the summer. So stay locked in. Because the next round is coming, and when it hits, you're going to want to already know the map. Thanks for rocking with me on this one. I'll catch you on the next.